Hello, my friends. It is time once again for another video, log, vlog, what have you, whatever we're calling it or whatever the term is nowadays. But something came up with in one of the discussion groups with a bunch of my fellow vintage retailers, flippers, whatever we're calling ourselves these days, about military vintage, and that a lot of them didn't, know that a lot about it. I kind of have an advantage because I did 22 years in the military, in the Army, as a paratrooper, ranger, all those other things, all the adjectives that go with it. And so, because I have about 22 years of experience in that field professionally, and one of the many jobs I had while I was in was a unit historian, so I was very, very well versed with the history of my unit all the way back to World War One, and the equipment. We had a little museum in my unit, and then I was in charge of that museum for a little bit of time anyway. And when we made our way back from the Middle East and from Panama prior to that for Operation Just Cause, I got to bring back some artifacts and had them included in the museum, and it just was just all a pretty cool thing. But I've been dealing, and actually I retired in 2001, but I have been dealing in vintage, as I've said in my previous videos, all the way back to the 90s when I was actually living in Hawaii, or I was stationed there, and fell in love with aloha shirts. Kind of grew up with that in Southern California, which is kind of a thing that a lot of people wore, especially around Orange County. So I kind of knew a lot about aloha shirts, and being over there, it was a perfect opportunity for me to go find the really cool vintage examples and to start becoming, a dealer in those things. So it was pretty cool. But anyway, to kind of get back to the main topic, which is military vintage, there's a lot of misinformation that's out there that I see. And the only reason I know that it's incorrect is because of my experience. And what that is I've seen a lot of different dealers, especially, not to pick on any group in particular, but especially a lot of dealers in Asia, and there is a lot of vintage collectors and dealers that are in various countries in Asia, and I'm very grateful for that because they're big buyers and they're in love with American vintage, really more than anything. The biggest area of collecting, of course, and has been for a long time, is vintage denim, especially vintage Levi's. But second to that, becoming just as popular, if not more popular, now, presently, is military. Of course, a lot of those countries we were actually in. During, various conflicts over the years, and they have collected up and they've become avid collectors, dealers, so forth and so on in vintage military. And I've seen a lot of different advertisements on Instagram or even for sale on eBay where the dealer will present, say, a uniform top, such as the one that I have on, and they'll say genuine uniform, genuine patches, so forth and so on. Now, because I was in the Army for 22 years, I know, and I'm talking about Army uniforms as opposed to, say, Marine Corps or Air Force or Navy, I will know automatically if I'm looking at the patches whether the patches are legitimate or not. Obviously, because you're in the military and you know what patches go on what arm and what patches would go on the correct uniform. By the way, this is not my uniform. This is just a uniform I picked up recently, and I've decided to keep it because it actually fits me. I will know whether the patches are legit. Certain patches go on certain areas of the uniform and it would make sense to me. Just one that I've seen just recently said, "Oh, this is a genuine World War II." It was either World War II or Vietnam. I think it was Vietnam actually. worn uniform, and all the patches are genuine, and they had it priced, I think, around $200 or something of that nature. If the uniform was legit and the patches were legit, in the condition that it was presented, it could have been worth around $200 or maybe even more than that. But I could tell automatically that, number one, the patches were not original to that uniform because the configuration of the patches were wrong. First of all, on this side above what we call the branch tape, or in this case, U.S. Army, they had a number of patches that were foreign, and it would not have gone on that uniform on that side. What it was is they had British jump wings. Well, British jump wings, being a foreign award, in this particular instance, would have actually gone above the name tab on the other side. If that soldier would have trained with and jumped with that unit, they could be or could have been awarded British jump wings. So, and I know that's a little bit confusing, especially to somebody who hasn't been in. So you should always really look at the uniform and maybe do some research. Another thing that was on that particular uniform that right away they had patches. They had the patch on the left shoulder that was a unit that wasn't even activated during Vietnam, and they had a patch on the right shoulder, which would have been the combat patch, like this one here. This is a MAC-V combat patch from Vietnam that shows that this particular person was in that unit during combat. This is the combat side. They wouldn't have one here on this side of the uniform if they weren't in actual combat. But this shows that the person was in combat. But on the particular uniform in question, I could see that the patch on that combat shoulder, or the right shoulder, was of a unit that wasn't even in Vietnam, wasn't even active during that time frame. So I knew, and I think to digress a little bit, I think there was one other patch that was an Air Force patch that wouldn't even be on that uniform in that configuration. So I knew right away that indeed that the patch was not original, or that the uniform itself was not original with the patches. It was what I would call a fantasy piece that somebody made up. Now, is the seller guilty of making that uniform? Probably not. I could give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that they probably picked it up and they assumed that it was legit and they advertised it as such. Or they could have just picked up some patches that they thought were cool looking and sewed them on the uniform and then tried to present it as being legitimate. In that case, the uniform was not legitimate, and I could see that, and it was definitely not worth the money that the person was asking for it. Not only were the patches wrong, they were in the wrong place. They were of two different branches. They were also not even sewn on correctly. There's this, by regulation or by uniform standard, there's a certain distance and a certain placement on the uniform that patches are supposed to be. And the way they had the patches, they were so far apart, and they had tabs above a patch where that particular patch didn't even have it, or wasn't even supposed to have a tab. Now, I know that that sounds confusing, and really, honestly, the only way you could really know that if you haven't been in the military or haven't been in that branch is to know somebody who's kind of an expert, and like me, and just ask them. Say, hey, does this look legit? And we could tell you right away if it looks fake or not. Another way is just to become very knowledgeable. There's all kinds of manuals and there's books out there for collecting military that will show you whether something is legitimate or not. Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about some different uniforms during the World War II to Vietnam era. This is actually a later type of uniform. When I say later, it was at the latter end of Vietnam, and it was being used by the United States Army and other branches all the way up to the early 80s. This is what's known as an OG 507. A lot of you probably heard or seen in a title or description OG 107. Well, there's a lot of different military uniforms that are this color that you'll see that have OG 107 in the title. OG 107 just means the color of the uniform. So there's a lot of different issues. Like this uniform, for example, the color, this is OG 107. This is OG, would be previously OG 107, but after the uniform became permanent press, and this is a permanent press example, this was changed to OG 507. Again, I know it sounds a little bit complicated, but if you see a green uniform like this that has a smooth finish, and usually they have the tag inside where you can just read it anyway, and it'll say OG 507 or OG 107. If it's OG 107, it's earlier in the Vietnam era and even earlier than that. If it's OG 507, that means that it's permanent press and really not as valuable as the OG 107s. But while we're on the topic, I'd like to show you this uniform. This is a uniform from World War II. It's actually World War II all the way up into post or pre-Korean War and a little bit post-Korean War. And it's a lot more valuable of a uniform because it's a lot rarer. This is a field uniform, of course, one that they would actually wear out in the field or wear in combat. And it's known as the HBT or herringbone twill. It has a completely different structure to it, and you could probably see it there on the camera. You see the lines that are in it? Well, there are like chevrons in the stitching that go up and down, and that is known as the herringbone twill. Another interesting feature about this particular uniform are the buttons. If you look on the button, there's actually 13 stars. So this is known as the 13-star herringbone twill uniform. A lot rarer than even any other typically worn World War II field worn in the European theater type uniform. Why? This was actually more accurately worn or more commonly worn in the Pacific theater because it was kind of a lighter material and it was a lot cooler. And what's interesting are the 13-star buttons. The 13-star buttons were actually worn by the United States Army. If you get a Marine Corps herringbone twill uniform, their buttons actually look a little bit different. So if you see the 13-star button, that'll clue you in that it's an Army uniform, and if it's herringbone twill, you got yourself something pretty special. This is the cotton version of the OG 107. You can see it has exposed buttons, but what's really cool about this uniform is it's got all of the patches on it except for the name tape that would be on it correctly. So you see the rank. So this guy was a sergeant in E5. This is his unit patch. And during that time frame, they were in color. Here, obviously, he was in the U.S. Army. This denotes that he was in the infantry, and this is known as a Combat Infantry Badge, or CIB. So he was in the infantry, and he was in combat. He was a sergeant. This was his unit, and this was the unit that he was in Vietnam with. So the CAV. So not only does it have a combat patch, and it has its rank, and this configuration shows you, it tells a story. There's history with the uniform, and all the patches are correct. And not only are they correct in the correct place, the correct placement, it tells the story of the soldier that wore it, and the patches themselves are legitimate. A lot of the newer reproduction patches, or all the new reproduction patches, especially when they're made overseas, you could use a black light and they will glow, especially the back side. The correct patches from the time frame is what we call the no glow. You put them under a black light and they have no glow to them whatsoever. So, and you could tell that the patches have been here since the uniform was issued. So not only is this uniform correct. All the patches are in the correct places. They're all no glow. And it tells you a story about the soldier who wore it. He was a sergeant. This was his unit. He was an infantryman. He was in combat. And this is the unit he was in combat with. A uniform like this, you could probably sell, especially if it has the name. This doesn't, so I don't know who it belonged to. Excuse me. But if the uniform was actually named, and I had maybe some documentation that went along with it, like an award that he won, or pictures of the unit he was in, that kind of a thing, then we would call this a uniform that is ID'd or named, and because it has the exact history, and we know who it belonged to, and you could probably look it up online someplace, it would be worth quite a bit more money. It could even go, depending on the unit and the person and what they're awarded and the story behind it, it could go for thousands of dollars. This one, as it is, it's not named, but everything is correct. It's a great example of the Vietnam era. This could be worth $150 to $200 in the right setting for the right collector. Another area of interest, and we're just going to talk about three. So we've got uniforms, just to save on time. So we have uniforms. Another area of interest is laundry bags. Now these are the simple, in this case, OD green bags that would hang in the barracks that soldiers would put their laundry in. It has a drawstring on it. This one is modern. It was actually used from the Vietnam era all the way up, probably all the way up to the present. We were still actually using them when I retired in 2001. Whether they're still using them exactly in this configuration today, I'm not 100% positive, but this is probably the last iteration of the laundry bag. Most of the time, people only used the laundry bags when they were in basic training anyway. When they got to their units, they didn't really use them that much. But unless they had some type of inspection and they had to show their original equipment that they were issued. But a modern laundry bag like this with no markings on it except for probably the U.S. This case, it actually has a person's name, and you can't really see it, but the name's on it. So it does have a little bit of a story to it, but it is modern. It was used during that Vietnam era all the way up to, I guess, the present, I think. And it has probably a value of maybe about $35, $40 at the very, very most. Older laundry bags, like this one here, you see the color. This is from World War II. And you can tell it's from World War II, number one, because of how it's made. It's a completely different material. It's thicker. And you could see the person's information on it. And it shows the person's service number here. It's not a social security number that's 9 digits like we have nowadays. This is actually either 7 or 8 digits, and they were used during a certain time frame. So it shows that it was from the World War II time frame. It's pretty neat. You know, when you have all these different names, and you could tell this was actually used by more than one soldier and was reused or reissued, and they didn't even bother to mark out the markings because it has a couple different names, and then they have that one serial number there, or what they call a military issued serial number, as opposed to the modern day 9-digit social security number or service number. And a piece like this has a lot of great eye appeal. A piece like this could be worth upwards of $100, especially if it's ID'd and it has a story that's attached to it. So just like anything else, if it has the history and the story attached to it, if it's ID'd to the person, and then of course the condition. This one's in fantastic condition. The more markings on it, the better as far as I'm concerned. And the last item that I'm going to talk about today are duffel bags. Duffel bags are the large bags that you see soldiers, you know, coming off of ships with or what have you, and it's thrown over their shoulders, and they're dragging it to their next duty station or what have you, or they're on a deployment. This is a modern day duffel bag. It's made out of nylon. You can see it has the soldier's name on it, and it does have a typical modern 9-digit Social Security number. The modern nylon duffel bags have backpack straps on them. One that's in a fantastic condition like this, it has been used because it has the soldier's name. Could be worth, $35, $45 around in there, really as much as somebody will pay for it. But because it's modern and probably still being used today, I'm sure, it's worth about 45 bucks. This one, on the other hand, is something pretty special. First of all, it is World War II. It's made out of a heavy cotton duck material. It has the one shoulder strap. It has no backpack straps on it because they didn't have it back then. It's kind of a completely different color, more of a brown, OD greenish type of color. Not only does it have the person's name on it, and this person was in the United States Navy, so this is a Navy issued bag. And the reason I know that and how I can tell is because his entire military history is right here on the bag. This is a pretty special find. This has a story. It is named. It has been ID'd. He has written every single place that he was deployed to, that he probably took a vacation to. It has over 80 different things that have been written on here of his entire tour. It even has areas of combat that he was in during World War II. So it has every duty station, every country that he went to, every port that he was in, and it just goes on and on and on, over 80 of them. And this is a piece of history. It does have his service number, it has his name, it's been ID'd, I've matched it up with somebody online, and it's just a really, really cool, as far as I'm concerned, it's a museum quality piece, and it could be worth $200, $300, $400 to the right collector. Pretty cool piece. There is a lot to talk about with military vintage. I can go on and on and on. And I'm obviously gonna break this up. This video is already over 20 minutes, so I'm gonna break this up into a series of different videos. And we'll talk about artifacts and headgear, different bags. But remember, you have to make sure that the uniform is legit with the placement of the patches, the right time period of uniform to the patches that would be on it. Was that unit even activated then? Was it actually in combat? There's a lot of different factors. Something that's ID'd to a specific person that has a lot of history to it, like that duffel bag, is obviously going to be worth a whole lot more. And condition is important, but really, just like anything else in the vintage game, knowledge is king, condition is king. The more you know, in the better condition that it's in, the better shopper that you could be as a reseller and know what a good price is to pay for it, and then to know what you could turn around and sell it for. So that's it for now of this first episode of Military Vintage. But remember, knowledge is king. Condition, proper placement, and then just knowing how to price it properly. And we'll see you next time.